are joined now by Anthony Broome from the Wolverine.com, part of the On3 network, previewing Nebraska's schedule this year. Anthony, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you joining us. Let's start. I want to start with Sherrone Moore here because I feel like a lot of I'm trying to figure out how big of a deal it is that he's going to miss some games, including the Nebraska game. It seems to me like a big deal. Seems like he's pretty involved in the offense and that part of the play calling in the game. But like, you tell me, you'd have a better idea. How big of a deal is it in your mind, the games that he's going to miss?
Yeah, well, it's not insignificant, right? Like it's different from when Jim Harbaugh was suspended because Harbaugh was able to coach the team during the week. You're in the meetings, you're putting the game plan in, all those sorts of things.
And he had
They
Sherrone
changed
Moore.
that rule since then. Well, and you have a guy who was probably a future head coach on your staff too. Now they've changed the rule where when you're suspended, you're out. Like, you are not with the program. So, we don't know what this is going to look like yet. I know Michigan has offered up the self-imposed 2-game suspension, but will it be more than that? I certainly don't think it'll be less than that now, given that they offered it up. And, if you leave that on the platter for the NCAA, they'll likely take it. It would be huge because this is not an easy – the schedule, I think, overall for them is a lot more forgiving than last year's when you played Texas, Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Alabama, and won those 2 games at the end of the year. But, in your first 6 weeks, first of all, Michigan doesn't play consecutive home games at all this entire season. In those first 6 weeks, you have a road trip to Oklahoma. You go to Nebraska in week 4, like you said, and then they go to the USC 2 weeks after that. So the second half of the schedule lends itself to a ramp up, maybe a springboard into the playoff, but you probably need to win one of those 3 road games in the first 6 weeks. And if you don't have your head coach for one of them, or if it's more than the 2 games, if it's the 4 games, he's not there for 2 of them, that's we're talking about that being season altering. Now, Chip Lindsey is capable. He's been a head coach before. He's running the offense now. Wink Martindale's a guy who, he's going to have his side of the ball taken care of as a defensive coordinator. But, not being in the building for potentially 2 to 4 weeks, that would be the one thing where you're like, hey, Michigan might be a playoff team, but you might skew to them not being it because there just might not be the margin for error down the stretch.
So when you look at how the team is constructed too, through the issues that could arise when you don't have a head coach available for some of those tough games, including a tough road game at Nebraska, when you can rely on your defense, though, it probably gives you a little bit more confidence and credence knowing that, hey, if we're going to have to play it tight, play it close-knit, we can rely on a very strong and tough defense. What is the strength of Michigan's leadership from that defensive side? Obviously, we know of Ernest Hausman, but is there other levels to that when it comes to how talented the leadership development is with that, I guess, the defensive group?
Yeah, I think so. Especially you're going to drop a guy back into the defense at some point early in the year in Rod Moore, who was the captain last year, despite being out with a torn ACL. He's going to be back this season. He's a 5th-year guy. He's really is an all Big Ten, potential All-American type of presence for them. So I think you've got that leadership at all 3 levels of the defense, and obviously Wink Martindale, with the gravitas that he has. And it was a little bit rocky to start the year, but they really finished strong, and I think those guys are completely bought in. And that defense, that's going to travel. We talk about all those tough road games. They're going to have that in their back pocket, and that's going to give them, I think, more than a puncher's chance to win all of those games. So, yeah, I think that what they have on defense, whether Sherrone Moore's there or not, I think that defense is going to have to carry them a little bit early on. As the offense, outside of just Bryce Underwood, the offense is incredibly young and has so many new pieces, and you're building this new system from the ground up. That defense has a lot on its plate already, but will have more so if you need to turn these games into a rock fight without your head coach.
So, Anthony, you brought up Bryce Underwood there, and I'm glad you did because that's where I wanted to go next. As you look at this offense and You're trying to project what they can be, how much they can improve over last year, where obviously they really struggled on that side of the ball. And you just laid out that first 6 weeks of the season where they go at Oklahoma, at Nebraska, at USC every other week, and you throw Wisconsin in there as well. How important is it, and I guess how realistic do you think it is that Bryce Underwood hits the ground running fast enough that Michigan's able to reach some of their aspirations for the season?
I think it's possible. I think whenever you have a guy who, not just number one quarterback, number one overall recruit, a lot of people think he's a bit of a unicorn, maybe the most college-ready passer to come out since like a Trevor Lawrence. That's all fine and good. When people make the Trevor Lawrence comparison, though, he was dropped into an infrastructure where they were national championship ready. You had the offensive line, you had the run game, you had the playmakers. And I think it's possible that Michigan's run game is going to be the engine that kind of determines all of this. They've got a duo in Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, and maybe even Underwood as a bit of a run threat at the quarterback position that I think at least early on, they're going to go as that trio goes, but specifically what Haynes and Marshall do. And, what's the easiest way to kind of get a freshman quarterback comfortable is you got to get him a lot of spoon-fed plays. And if you're able to control the line of scrimmage and run the football, and they have questions on the offensive line too. This is not set in stone there either. They could be starting a true freshman at left tackle as well, and Andrew Babalola, who was also a 5-star. A lot's going to have to go right for him to hit the ground running, so to speak. But I think that he's capable of being, that rising tide, and his talent alone. I mean, last year, that passing game was, I think, as bad as I've ever seen it. And that includes a 3-9 season that they had under Rich Rod, back in 2009. They're the only team in the country, and this is service academies included, that didn't have a passing play of 40 or more yards. You can find yourself a busted coverage here and there just by happenstance. They never did. So I think that, you don't want to just apply it to, if they had Bryce Underwood last year, they'd have been much better. So now you plug him in this year, you feel like you're better, and all of a sudden everything's fixed. I think the chemical mixture is different there, but he's different, though. He is cut from a different cloth. And would I be surprised if he had success right away? No, and I think a lot of people sort of expect that too.
So Michigan came out yesterday in the coaches poll at 14. Do you see that as Michigan's ceiling, or is there potential for the Wolverines to keep on climbing higher than that? Where did you value where they initially were placed in the coaches poll?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know what the coaches poll criteria is for them. Are you projecting how teams finish? And everyone's different, so it's impossible to know the answer to this. When I see them at 14, what that tells me, you just look at it, zoom out, aggregate in the big picture. That tells me that the coaches think that's a team that could make the playoff, but might also finish just on the outside looking in, which I don't think that's an unfair expectation at all. I think that's probably the most realistic outcome, in this range of outcomes that they have. The ceiling is, I think, higher than that. I could see them being a team that, I think the absolute best case scenario, we're talking everything goes right. Bryce Underwood hits the ground running. This team has everything it needs. I think your absolute best case scenario is probably the type of team that Notre Dame had last year, where maybe you go on this magical run, you're in the title game, but you run into a buzzsaw. That's the most the wide ranging end of the outcome. The other end would be the offensive line doesn't find its footing, and that Underwood does struggle a bit because he is still a freshman, and maybe they are still closer record-wise to what they were last year. I don't think the variance in what they could be is as wide as what maybe last year's team was, but 14 feels about right, at least heading into the season.
So, for Anthony, for you, what is the biggest question mark? You mentioned, obviously, the youth of Bryce Underwood. You mentioned the offensive line and whether that comes together or not. Like, for you, what is the thing you look at and say, hey, this is the thing I am the most maybe skeptical of based on what they have versus what they need from that group?
Yeah, if you're looking for one spot that can maybe swing their outlook in either direction, I think it is that offensive line. Last year, you lost a lot of guys that were on the offensive line for the duration of that run from 21 to 23. And they just weren't as physically imposing as they had been. They weren't as in sync as they had been. And they've taken steps to address that. They brought in, a legendary offensive line coach, Juan Castillo, as sort of an analyst or an understudy to their current offensive line coach, Grant Newsome. Those guys did get bigger, more physical this offseason in the weight room. But there's still some fluidity there. And like I said, you could go into the year starting a true freshman at left tackle and potentially a true sophomore at right tackle. And there's just a lot of, Michigan's good offensive lines had probably 8 to 9 playable guys there. And we'll see if they're there. That, to me, that's the biggest question mark heading into the year. The early returns have been pretty positive, though. They've had pads on in camp for like 2 days. So there's not a whole lot I put into that. But I think that offensive line is going to be you talk about the run game being the engine and the core of what Michigan wants to do. The offensive line plays a huge role in that. And if they can control the line of scrimmage, that's going to make it easier for the back. It's going to make it easier for Bryce Underwood. So that's what I'm honing in on heading into the year.
That's Anthony Broome from thewolverine.com, part of the On3 network. Anthony, thank you so much for your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.